G'day and welcome to another episode of Perth Property Insider. I'm your host, Jared Mann, and today I'm chatting with Trevor Dunkley from Property Wizards. And I'm really excited to get into his perspective on the market as one of the leading buyer's agents and most awarded ones in Perth. I'm going to go into some of the investing formulas he helps people with and what he's used over the years himself, as well as what he'd suggest for a starting out investor. And of course, we've both seen many mistakes that investors have made over the years, and we're going to unpack some of those. And we really go deep into some of the things we're seeing in the market and how to navigate it and handle it as a buyer, as well as the outlook for what we see ahead. And what does a buyer's agent exactly do and what value can they add? So, really great episode. Let's go inside.
Welcome to Perth Property Insider, where you will learn how to grow your wealth and improve your life using Perth property. Our show is brought to you by Investors Edge Real Estate, the highly rated and award-winning property management specialists servicing the whole of Perth. Now, here is your host, Jared Mann.
G'day, Trevor. Thanks for joining me today.
How are you doing, Jared?
Yeah, I'm really good.
It's a pleasure. It's good to catch up. Yes.
Well, in the middle of lockdown as we speak, and it's nice to still connect over the online space, isn't it?
Yes, it's actually great that we have these tools available to us to do what we're doing. It's fantastic. Yes.
Well, today I'm really excited because we're going to dig into your whole background and how you help clients get some fabulous results in this market. And it hasn't happened overnight, has it? It's been a journey, and you've seen a few cycles now.
Yes, no, here in Perth, we've been through, this would be, say, our third upward cycle that we're in. Prior to that, we've been involved in properties for, over 35 years.
Yeah.
And it's been a great journey for us.
Yeah, you almost can't quantify how priceless that is, can you? Because there's such a big difference when you've been through a few cycles and you get experience versus knowledge from a book.
I think it makes a tremendous difference in that understanding in terms of how to strategize forward, particularly for clients, and being able to assist them and advise them. Because we've been through that, we've seen what's happened, we know how to deal with things moving forward now.
Yeah, and it's never exactly the same way, but you start to recognize the signposts, and almost every time, you have to keep a check on your emotions as well. But when you've been on that roller coaster before, you kind of know what's around the corner, don't you?
Oh, you've got a very good insight into the frustrations that are coming. Yes, most definitely.
And of course, the banks at the moment are very difficult to deal with. How are you finding that with your clients? And
the biggest problem we have is the time it takes them to get back to us to review the documentation. There seems to be an incredibly long lag time, and we've had to, on quite a number of occasions, get extensions to finance clauses and stuff like that, purely because of the banks taking so long.
Very frustrating, isn't it? And we're just going through buying a personal home, and we had 8 weeks to get our finance approved, and it was the most arduous, long
8 weeks,
sleepless experience of my life. And I got a call 2 days ago from the selling agent saying you either waive your finance clause or you get it through tomorrow morning, or we're terminating the contract because we've had buyers willing to pay 75 to 100 grand more
on the
in
properties.
The 2 months. Yes.
No, and I think we're going to see more of that happening with sellers actually saying if the finance is not there by 4 o'clock or 4:30 on the given day, they're pulling it because they know they can go back and add 30, 40, 50,000 to the deal.
Yeah. And I guess that's the advantage with you being not only a buyer's agent, but also, having your finance broking side as well. So, you can go end to end with
together
someone.
Nicely. Yes, they tie in rather well, in fact.
I think it was Michael Yardney that said a number of years ago that property is a game of finance with a few properties thrown in. and he couldn't probably be more right.
Yes, particularly in this market.
Yeah.
Very, very much so. Very much so.
So tell us about your investing journey so far. Obviously, you've seen a lot, done a lot.
So our property buying started in our early 20s. And predominantly back then, we were looking at unit apartments that we could furnish to rent out to corporate rentals. We also owned a few properties that had that potential for future development.
Yeah, I guess you would have got a higher income potentially there, and at certain points in the market, they really overpay, don't they? Yeah,
much higher. Now, here in WA and Perth, our basic strategy really has been looking at properties that have that potential for development. That's been our primary personal focus, is looking for those. So giving us choices and options as to when we want to do developments. So that has worked very well, where we've bought land, subdivided that, sold that off. We've had properties that have been retained and built, where we've done cosmetic cleanup, sold those off, kept the land. And then we've done other smaller developments as well, up to 10-unit apartments.
Yeah, so you've done some of the higher density as well,
Yeah, so those are the strategies that we work with that have been very positive for us. But I think for a lot of investors, one needs to look at a far broader mix of opportunities. But yeah, we can definitely touch on those as well.
Well, what formula would you suggest for the average Perth property investor? Because I guess I've seen a lot of people, get burnt by property development and subdivision. And, I often suggest that buying the best, quality property in the best area they can afford is a good place to start. And if they, do want to go into some of these adding value strategies, they should educate themselves and make sure that they've got a team of specialists around them, such as yourself, and a good real estate agent, good property manager, good surveyor, good town planner, like the essential teams there to make it a success. But, what should the average person do, or what's the formula you'd suggest for them?
Well, we basically have, in terms of residential property, I would say there are 4 fundamental strategies to work with, or combinations of those.
Yep.
And when I discuss this with clients, I take them back a step and discuss that they're spending $1 that's going to be broken up to buy a land component and the bricks and mortar for the rental stream. And that sets up a ratio. And based on that ratio, you'd then be looking at properties that are positive cash flowed, such as your unit apartments fit into that category very well. When we go after properties like that for the cash flow.
Lower land value, I guess, and higher cash flow.
Higher cash flow. Also then to be very aware of what the levies are that they're going to be hit up for. So looking at your smaller, more boutique type developments for those. On the other side of the coin, or seesaw, is looking at properties that would be your capital growth, capital gains, negatively geared properties, houses on bigger blocks of land. So we have that as an option, like a second strategy. And then you get a strategy that falls in between, where you're looking at a combination of both yield and organic growth. So almost like a 50-50 split. And normally the type of property that fits really well into that category would be your villas. And again, you want that to be in a small group, not in a big group. So you're not being stung with heavy levies at all. And then the fourth one, which is for me the most interesting, most dynamic one, because it gives us so many choices and options, is finding properties based on the zoning and the block size. That would give you opportunities to do, say, either retain and build, where you can do a cosmetic cleanup, do a subdivision build, maybe sell off the older house, keep the newer one, or doing triplex sites. So there's quite a number of combinations that come out of that. And I think the nice thing with that particular strategy is you're taking something from old to new. So changing your cash flow dynamic from being negatively geared to neutral, positively cash flowed. But there's a caveat on that, and that is making sure that you buy the right type of property in the right area to make that actually work.
Yeah.
Because as you rightfully say, a lot of people have got stung doing this type of thing. And I think
I guess being conscious of the supply that's coming on, and, you know, it's no point creating land if there's 30 other blocks the same, all for sale. And likewise with you, if you're creating an end product, what's the supply like? And
yes, and I think the other thing in terms of doing that is, are you doing that to sell, or are you doing it to build a portfolio? If you're doing it to sell, I think the chances of getting burnt could be quite high, particularly if the market turns against you. However, if you do it because you're going to hold it for the longer term, you're going to ride through those different cycles.
Yeah.
And then you can cherry pick the timing that you want to offload or sell. Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, at the moment, it is a lot harder to get builders to even answer their phones, let alone do a project for you on time for a reasonable sum.
It's perfect in terms of buying and holding then a property that would be, say, negatively geared for a while until the sting has come out of what's been happening over the last sort of 6 months with the grants and so on.
I imagine that they're going to ramp up their workforces and then probably in 12 to 14 months be crying out for more work to do. And that's when, you know, the smart investor can look to potentially move their project forward. They'll then be staffed up and ready and capable and have capacity that they need to fill. So
yes, no, I think that sort of timing sounds about right. And then the last strategy that we have is not in residential, but to do with commercial property. And looking at commercial property, there are a number of different dynamics within that. But predominantly, one is then looking at the yield. You're chasing the yield because that's a true rental that's coming in. And when we buy those sort of investment properties, we're wanting to understand the lease. What is the lease? What are the dynamics of the lease? And so on, because that's normally the big driver in terms of what you're going to pay for that you're going after.
And I guess if you were starting again as a property investor, what would you do, given everything that you know now and the mistakes you've made along the way? Would you try and jump in the deep end, or would you take it slower, or what would you do?
I think what you mentioned earlier on is, I think the first thing is understanding your budget, knowing what you can afford to do.
Yep.
And then looking to get into the best possible area you can. And it might be that you just scrape in at the bottom end of it, but with a very good upside property for developing. So it might be that you're buying a property that's a bit run down, needs a bit of work on it, but long term is going to give you the back end that you're looking for. And that, I think, is very important. You don't want to, in this market, not be ready with your finance, not understand where you can push your boundaries to. You need to really understand the areas that you're wanting to buy in, because within areas, you've got good pockets, bad pockets, indifferent pockets, and you don't want to be overpaying for a bad area or not such good area within a suburb, whereas you could have got into a far better part of that suburb. So there are a number of things there that I think.
So just on that, like, how are you adjusting to the prices moving up in the areas? I mean, because it's almost happening across the board now, even suburbs in the outer areas. When I look 3 to 4 months later, I'm seeing 5 to 10% increases on where they were at their bottom. And so if you look purely at the data of what's sold and settled, and you pretty much can't look back more than two months or 3 months.
I would say maximum 3 months, because it is moving fast. I think when one goes in and does research and you pick up a property that, say, sold 2 months ago, for argument's sake, let's say it sold for 550, and the market, you can assume, has worked on somewhere between a 6 and 10% sort of movement. You need to know that that budget that you need to work with to buy that property today is going to be literally 10% more.
Yeah.
So for a lot of buyers, what I think they miss out on is that last sale sets the benchmark.
Yeah.
You can't go back in and look at stuff that's much older and think you're going to be able to buy that same property at a discount, or
Yeah.
it's going to be, the competition is going to drive it.
And as we're
doubt.
appraising as sales agents, we pretty much take, okay, well, that last one sold for 550. People are asking probably then 570 to 590, and each person pushes it a little bit further, throws the net wider. And in many of the upper end areas at the moment, they're just putting offers on there. So you've really got...
You have no idea where to pitch yourself. And I think this is then for the people who understand the dynamics of an area and what is happening in it are probably better prepared to go in and make offers on properties, even though there are huge numbers that are attending the home opens.
Yeah. I guess what we found as well is that I had my ear to the ground to try to find out what the properties under offer had actually gone for. And you hear rumours, and sometimes the agents divulge it, and sometimes the neighbour down the road that you're chatting to knows the seller. So I managed to get 3 good price point references to make me feel better about paying more. And then the thing I always say to buyers is you don't really want to buy a property that no one else is interested in either, because unless it's got major things that you can correct, if you're buying fully well presented property and no one's interested in, that tells me that it's overpriced. But of course, if you're buying an ugly duckling and no one's interested, then you focus on what you can create and how you can transform it, and see the value where others don't. But in our case, we had 9 other offers on the table, and so I just waited back until it was to see how it was shaping up, and then came over the top of everyone else because I knew the value of it because I'd seen enough.
Yes. And that, I think, is critical, is to be well informed, to really understand the dynamics of the area that you're wanting to get into, and having a conversation.
And then for those that missed out, it's now proven in 2 months later that buying it at that time was the best thing to do. Once you're sure on your area and the reasons you're buying and what you're buying. And that's why that confidence, people can get it from you because you're doing it every day, aren't you?
Yes. And I think the other thing in this market, because Perth has been flat and negative for 7, 8 years, and we've been through this very high, low roller coaster ride. If we look at where the market is now compared to where it was at its height, so even though people might say, well, I think I've overpaid for it, but in reality, they've probably still got it at a good price compared to where the market is heading.
Is going, yeah. I mean, I'm expecting 30 to 50% almost across the board, and then different areas will do better than others.
Yes.
And so, I think the tide is going to raise all ships, but if you select the right area, right property, you can... I mean, I just recorded an episode, which I'm very excited for everyone to hear about the difference even a few percent of growth makes over the long term in 10, 20, 30 years. So I'll have to share with you some of the research that I've compiled on 30 years of growth history. So you may have some of your own data like that. But
if you've plotted that growth history, I think we've got one that goes back about 40 years. And we put that onto a spreadsheet growth story, and you can see exactly where the properties have taken off, how they've jumped, the percentages they've jumped, what they've come down to, and how the property market has moved. It's actually very, very interesting. And I think it's an indication, in a sense, that the market can go back to those heights and then possibly go past those.
Yeah. And you'd imagine if I've typically seen in the past as well that it does very quickly get back to that previous high. And then because the other capitals have also gone past their previous highs, relatively speaking, we're still so affordable. And with rents increasing, there's the yield there for investors too that suggests that prices can go higher from a purely investment point of view. So everything is pointing to a long road ahead for the next 2, 3, 4 years.
Yes, I sort of think that the next 3 years we're going to see some very dynamic property growth, rental growth coming into the Perth market. And as you say, some areas will do a little bit better than others in it, but that's to be expected, I think,
Yeah.
generally in any of the capital cities.
Well, I guess even a year ago when I did a study into all the projects in the pipeline, it showed that the peak of capital investment at the time was going to be in 2022 and 2023. Now the
Yes.
government's come in and piled a stimulus as, the highest amount of stimulus on the top of what was already in the pipeline. So, very often we go too far on these things, and that's the way that boom and bust cycle tends to work in Perth, funnily enough.
Oh, yes, very right. And I think with all the builds that are going to be taking place, the infrastructure and that is going to run very comfortably over the next 3 years. I think also with mining picking up again and the amount of stuff that's happening there is going to be also a very positive driver.
So, I mean, the market can make you out to be an absolute hero. In my early days, thought I was king of the world when I was doing some of my renovations and buying things. When the market's going up 10 grand a month and you're taking longer with your renovation, it's not exactly a big problem.
No.
But you and me have both seen the other side of the coin, and it's still
Yes.
very well worth noting. What are some of the mistakes you've seen investors make and that are top of mind for you?
I think some of the biggest mistakes that they make is being overconfident in their knowledge and not really doing the right type of research. And it's possible that they're not aware of what they need to be looking at or being advised on. I've seen too many investors sort of rely on gut feel and say, oh, my gut feel is this and my gut feel is that. I think it's one of those things that one needs to put aside and not engage in at all, but really getting your research work done, understanding your limitations. So you might want to, say, buy a triplex site to do a triplex build, but one, finance might not allow it to happen, timing might not allow it to happen. And you always need to have some kind of exit strategy in terms of, if you did, say, do a retain and build, once it's completed, are you going to sell the old house, sell them both?
Why does no one think about their exit, Trevor? Help me here.
I don't know, but you need to understand. I think people short circuit the negative and don't want to think about it, don't want to discuss it, don't want to put it on the table. I think it's very important to know, if it hits the fan, what are you going to do? How are you going to cope with it? What have you got in place for it? I mean, you think in terms of the banks and the lenders. If you're doing a development, they're generally going to hold 5% back to cover themselves, just in case. And what is your 5%? Where does that stopgap come in? What is the strategy around that to be sure that, yes, if it doesn't go according to plan, you do have a plan B that you can work with?
Yeah, especially when investors are partnering with others as well. Everyone focuses on that short-term outcome, but doesn't consider what happens if that doesn't go to plan. Are we prepared to rent this, and for what price? And they don't even do a cash flow on renting it out.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yes, I think those are really the biggest negatives of people thinking they know it all, but don't. They haven't had enough time to do enough questioning and research work dealing with other people. Coming to advise,
it's a delicate balance, isn't it? Because you don't want to get analysis paralysis and go round and round spinning your wheels. And that's why I guess getting the right specialist can short circuit that and add so much value to the whole process.
It would, because if you think in the current market, one, you've got to be fast, you've got to be quick off the mark to be able to win a deal. And it's not always that it's based on price. It can be based on timing, on conditions and various things like that, that you can win those deals. But being prepared, I think the biggest thing in a market like this is you've got to have answered all the questions, know exactly what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, and what is the back end of it going to be looking like.
Makes a lot of sense. So what sort of activity are you seeing from your clients? Are they buying any specific types of properties or specific types of areas? Or have you got a bit of a mix?
It's actually quite a wide mix, really, because we've got expats and people from over the east who are coming back into the Perth market buying homes for living in anything from a year to 4 years. We've got a client who's in the US who's just bought a property and he's only going to be moving back here in about 4 years' time. So we've got quite a strong owner-occupier demand. And then the investor developer side is possibly the next biggest part in looking for and finding those duplex, triplex, and slightly bigger sites are the ones, and those are now in pretty short supply. So there's a bit more bun fighting over getting in very quickly to make the deal happen. So that sort of pent up energy that is out there, particularly the home buyers, I think a lot of them are very surprised at going to home opens and suddenly seeing that there's a queue out the front door to get in to view the property. You know, they're like 40, 50, 80 buying units that are going through. And I think that leads them to being a bit bewildered as to what do they do? What's their next step? How do they cope with all of this? As buyer's agents, we go into those situations and we win a lot of them purely because we understand the market. We understand that we've got to move incredibly fast to pull the property off the market. So to give you an example, there's an ad value triplex site that came to the market and the agent took the ad down because he had over 70 inquiries in a couple of hours. He said they just couldn't cope with it. So they pulled the property off the advertising. And we bought that purely because we moved incredibly quickly. We had a very good buyer who knew and understood what was happening. And I think we got it at an exceptionally good price. And, you know, when things happen that fast, it leaves a lot of the other buyers thinking, well, what could I have done to have actually won the day on that? So it leaves a lot of them, I think, also frustrated, possibly a bit angry. Yeah. And the negative... I
get some of that directed at me quite often.
Yeah. The unfortunate thing is the negative of that is that they become pressurized and they then start taking chances and invariably going past their budget, doing things just because they're so desperate to get a property.
Yeah. I mean, I can't help it if people don't come to the first home open and they call me on a Monday when we've already had everyone through and I've followed up and gotten the best price from the market that's out there and possible. Yeah, if you're not at that first home open or the first time it's open, I've even got investors from over east making offers sight unseen prior to first home opens. It's getting to that level.
Yeah, that takes us back to sort of 2006, 2007.
Yep.
We bought huge numbers of properties sight unseen, but then we've got the systems in place to make sure that
tied up with conditions that it's going to
that they're not going to get stung at all.
Yep. So what is I guess buyers agents are becoming a bit more popular here in Perth. They've been operating in Sydney and Melbourne for, I guess, a lot more commonplace over there.
Yes.
And the word's thrown around a lot here, but I think some people also don't understand exactly what you do end to end and how much value you can add, because even I myself, use buyer's agents when I'm purchasing around Australia, and I'd consider doing it for Perth as well, because when you're time poor and, you've got your whole busyness of your world going on, then...
And you find a lot of the people who do use buyer's agents, as you say, are time poor. We get quite a lot of business from interstate and from literally all other countries around the world that we assist buyers, whether it's investment or home to live in or commercial property. And quite often, unfortunately, a lot of buyers have had negative experiences and as a result don't trust the selling agents. So we've got a whole mix of why people actually come to us for assistance and help. And I'll run through the mechanics of what we do.
That'd be good. End to end, like what's involved.
So when a client comes on board with us, number one, we want to understand the strategy. What is the strategy? What is the budget they're working with? What is the back end result they're pushing to get. So when we're looking at...
Well, they're the first two things I always ask too.
Yeah, because
I do get blank stares a lot to either one question or the other.
And sometimes people are a bit shy about saying what their budget is, but
yeah,
you need to know as a buyer's agent what you're working with, what are the boundaries, what are the parameters that you need to be working with. So for quite a lot of clients, they might say, well, we want to be north of the river, south of the river, or have particular geographic pockets they're interested in based on schools, particularly like when you look at Willerton, Rosmoyne, because the two government schools there are very powerful. We would then go to the total market. So our, call it hunting ground, you could say, goes from Yenship right up in the north down through to the Dawesville Cut, through to the hills. And so it's a massive big area, and it covers all types of investment strategies that you can find in the marketplace. And we then go through a process of elimination where we're looking for all the reasons not to buy something, to get rid of pockets, get rid of areas. We have a whole list of reasons why we throw things out. Could be power lines, could be busy roads, all of those dynamics we bring into it. So we can very quickly, within about 5-10 days, get down to potentially maybe 3 properties that now are the best pick of what's available out there. And we generally put that information together into a short report, which we then send to the client. Quite a lot of detail on each of the properties in the short report, but it gives them a quick overview of the property. It'll also give them links either to the real estate agent side or private sellers website, things like that. We can then have a quick conversation with the client, irrespective of where they are in the world. We can make that call very quickly. If the client then says, yes, there's a particular property in that lot that they want to go after, then basically on our side, all hell breaks loose, because we now are going to go into a process of doing the comparative analysis, looking at where we believe the value of the property lies in the market. We also then want to start the due diligence, and the due diligence covers a number of things, both on the property and around the property and the environment that the property is in. A lot of information there. To give you an example, we want to know about airport noise, we want to know about crime activity, contaminated sites, all those different things all come into that understanding, all the different impacts that these things could have. You know, one of the ones that people don't look at is road widening and the impact of extra traffic, noise, fumes, and so on.
Very often these things come up very later in the game, and sometimes not until you're selling again. So
until it's too late, yeah. So we cover all of that, and we present reports on the short report, the comparative analysis, the due diligence. We would write up the offer and acceptance contract with our subject to clauses in. And those then would depend, in some cases, is it owner moving on? Is it tenant who want to know who and what about the tenant? And those clauses generally are designed in such a way as to protect the client, particularly if you've got clients that are over east, you're wanting to make sure that if there's a big negative that comes out in a structural report or something like that, you've got the opportunity to either go back in, renegotiate to get that fixed sorted, or if the sellers aren't prepared to do anything about it, you've got the right to cancel and walk away.
And I have seen over the years maintenance items still run up a big tab, but not necessarily, fall into structural soundness. So
yes,
definitely a middle ground. And whenever I write contracts, I'd make it to my satisfaction. And sometimes that's not possible if you've got immense pressure, but there's obviously varying degrees of how you can protect yourself.
And I think it's important, particularly from a buyer's agent's point of view, is to be able to protect your client, number one. And two, we buy time to complete that due diligence, getting building reports, best reports, and so on. And so we can go through them, check them, make sure everything is right. Any problems, we've got time to go back, renegotiate, and get those sorted.
And I guess if you are tenanting the property, you don't want to find out later that you've got a big list of things you need to do to before you're going to make it habitable.
Yes.
Or not just habitable, but in clean, well presented, good condition,
Well, we
a lot
normally
of
throw that side of the problem onto you as the
yes.
property manager to deal with. But no, you do want to know that you're not going to spend an arm and a leg on bringing it up to scratch.
Or at least be prepared for that and have it factored in.
Well, you generally with a lot of the properties, there's a bit of cosmetic cleanup, painting, maybe carpets, things like that one needs to do to freshen it just to get a better quality tenant into the property.
And how important have you seen tenant and the property manager side? Because so many investors are focused on the front end, and all the reasons I see someone sell are often on the bad experience on the back end. And we've seen a hell of a lot of that the last 2 to 3 years. And because investors weren't buying, we effectively became the troubleshooting, we fix bad property management firm. So we mainly just had issues to solve and problems to fix, but it'd have to be the number one reason someone does get out of investing. And it's a crying shame when they have a bad experience that could have otherwise been prevented. So how do you see that fitting into the picture?
Yes, I think with property management, I think the thing that is very important, what Liz and I have discovered is working with like yourself and maybe one or two other property managements out there. They've got to have the history, they've got to have the record. You've got to be able to prove to your client that, yes, this is the right recommendation that you're making for them to go with. And that really comes back down to experience, because you quite rightfully say there are quite a lot of potential property management organizations, teams, people out there that are pretty lazy. They don't do the regular inspections. They're not looking after the client as such, but they're collecting their fee every month. Yeah. And I think property management...
The property gradually slides over time, and you wake up
Absolutely.
10 years later and your asset's not worth what it used to be.
Absolutely. And I think any good property management, like yourselves, when you go through and you do your property inspections, you present a report that outlines issues that need to be dealt with. And it's not a case of deal with them in your own time, deal with them now rather than dealing with them later, because, they'll say stitch in time saves nine applies to property in a very, very big way. So getting things done correct to keep the standard of your property up. You don't want to, in 5 years' time, go in, tenant moves out, and you've got a massive amount of work the last 5 years, rental income suddenly being spent on fixing the property up again.
And it's a lot harder to keep a tenant accountable if it's not done along the way.
Yes.
And we do a lot of things to, I guess, prevent, issues. It's kind of a selfish on our part because we want everything to run as smooth as possible, but we've got the same vested interest as the landlord in making sure that we're selecting the right tenant. And I know that we go so much deeper than the average property manager. We're checking social medias, we're checking the references to the nth degree, and if we get the tenant right, it's half the battle.
And it also, by having the right tenant also is going to make sure your property is going to be looked after, because they've got pride in what they're living in. They want to look after it, they want it to present nicely. And I think that tenant choice that you guys go through, that process might be a longer process, but I think very vital to the long-term outcome of that investment property.
And we find as well that if the quality and conditions kept up, it's very easy to then see the
problems
and see when things start to either get damaged or have not be up to scratch. So
yes. And I think with clients of ours where they don't already have their own property manager in place, we like to bring the property manager in at the pre-settlement inspection. That you can do your precondition reports, you can see the property. You're in a position then to advise clients of the little things that need to be done to tweak it, to bring it up to a good standard. And then by having that done, you're bringing potential renters in who are comparing that property with another one and are prepared to pay a higher dollar because it's cleaner, neater, and more comfortable to be in. Yes.
And in this market, some people think it doesn't matter as much, but I know from the tenants that we are getting overpaying all the time, that someone that has money and has seen enough properties will disproportionately pay for quality too.
Yes.
And even just all the basics. Oh, this place
Yeah.
is clean and well presented. I really want it and I'm prepared to pay the extra.
No, and that's what you want. That's what you want, is to boost that in every possible way.
So what should someone do if they do want to, I guess, explore getting your help with buying a property in Perth along the lines of the various strategies that you've touched on?
Pretty straightforward. They can always email me with a request to call them. So we have quite a lot of people who come via the website to us.
Yeah, we'll put your website in the show notes as well. People can check that out.
Word of mouth, a lot of people come to us, have been referred to us, and just recently had quite a few phone calls out of the blue from people saying, I heard from you, from a friend of mine, to get in touch with you, you've helped them. So either by phone, by email, either which way, is when it comes in, I try and get back to people the same day if it's at all possible. Normally, very seldom do I have to just text them to say, look, sorry, can't call you today, call you tomorrow, but jump on it as fast as possible. Yes.
No worries. Well, there's so much more we could talk about. I'll probably have to get you back for another episode in the future because we've got a lot of other things listed here. But thanks for the chat today, Trevor. And
no, exciting
times to be seeing the results that you've been getting for your clients lately and some of the properties that have come through to us for management. So I know they've been very happy, and
yes,
and it's just great to also see the difference that buying the right property can have when the market's going with you.
Oh, and I think being prepared is the biggest thing, particularly in a market that's taking off like this one, is really having all your ducks in a row. Excellent. So that you can move very fast. So, yes, good to talk to you. And we'll catch up again soon.
Thanks, mate. And hopefully we're out of lockdown.